Word on Health, the report with its finger on the pulse of popular medicine, with Paul Pennington. Word on Health, for your very best of health. In this edition of the podcast, I'm looking at postpartum psychosis. It's a severe but treatable mental health condition that is thankfully rare, affecting around about 1,500 cases each year. Whilst awareness of it has improved in recent years, it remains under-recognised compared to other postnatal mental health issues like postnatal depression. In fact, a 2021 survey by the charity Action on Postpartum Psychosis found that only 6% of expectant parents received information about the condition during antenatal classes, and many healthcare professionals report limited confidence in discussing or identifying the illness. To help gain a greater understanding of the condition, I'm joined by Sally Wilson from Action on Postpartum Psychosis.
It usually occurs in the first few days or weeks after giving birth. Sometimes people can experience psychosis during pregnancy. Sometimes it can happen later on, a few months down the line, but the majority of cases we see in those first kind of few days, weeks after giving birth.
Sally, what are the signs and signals that might suggest the presence of postpartum psychosis?
There's lots of early signs and symptoms leading up to where we can detect people's behaviour changing. Things like confusion, so not really understanding what's happened or where they are, or sometimes people describe like a sense of time is a bit strange, so they can't work out how much time has passed or what time of day it is. Racing thoughts or busy mind, so that's where we talk about maybe people being a little bit manic. It might not look like it from the outside, but thoughts and everything inside the brain is going very quickly. Bit of vagueness. Sometimes people can't communicate very well because they don't fully understand what's going on. They feel a bit disorientated, feeling quite exhausted and tired, but not being able to sleep. People just can't switch off, or they feel like they just don't need to sleep. They've got to get up, they've got to tend to the baby, they've got to clean the house, they've got to write lists. And then over time that leads to being detached from reality, hallucinations and delusions, so that's seeing and hearing things that aren't really there. When we have that kind of full-blown psychosis kicking in.
Do we know what causes it?
There isn't enough research looking at the causes of postpartum psychosis, but there are certain areas where there is a bit of evidence. We know that childbirth is a trigger, so that suggests that something biological or hormonal is going on. So there's some genetic work being looked at to look at why maybe one woman would feel more vulnerable in that situation compared to another one. Sleep is a big factor. What we don't know is if the lack of sleep is like a symptom. We're not 100% sure about that. There's less evidence for obstetric factors, so things like mode of delivery for the birth, or whether they've had to have lots of interventions, or whether they've had a traumatic birth. So it tends to suggest that there's something a bit more biological going on, physiological, maybe psychological, and less about what happens in the birth. We have women that will have a non-traumatic birth and not many interventions, and they still might develop postpartum psychosis, whereas we've seen people that have had quite traumatic births. So what we tend to say is that it's a bit of a perfect storm of maybe a woman's got these genetics where they're more susceptible to developing these kind of illnesses, together with some sleep issues, together with maybe lots of interventions in the birth. So it's a bit of a kind of, lots of different factors involved.
Is there any evidence to show if prior to pregnancy the woman has had any challenges with her mental health that may make her more likely to develop postpartum psychosis?
In about 50% of the cases where it happens, it's considered out of the blue. So what that says is that sort of anybody really could get postpartum psychosis. So we tend to say that it can happen to anyone. But in 50% of the cases, what we see is a previous mental illness. So it might be someone has bipolar disorder, they might have had psychosis before, or they may have had previous postpartum psychosis. So those people are at a slightly higher risk of developing postpartum psychosis. So there seems to be some kind of link between those illnesses. But we do know that it can happen completely out of the blue as well.
You were telling me off microphone that this is a condition that you've gone through and recovered from. You've kindly said that you're happy to share how that felt and the impact it had on your family.
It's a very scary, frightening time. I guess particularly in those early few days, you just don't really understand what's going on. So for me, I got poorly pretty much after I woke up from giving birth, and I just couldn't understand what was going on. It's very confusing. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't really communicate what it was, really. I would sort of go in and out of like, I know what's happening to me. This is what's happening. I've got a bit of insight, but then living in this kind of different reality, my kind of own universe and own world and things. So it was a very scary time in those first few days. And then once you get the kind of treatment, and we can talk a little bit more about what treatment might look like, then it's quite scary maybe for the family around people, because it might be that they have to go away to have treatment or inpatient hospital. And then that's scary for the family and the partners around that. What does that look like? You know, will I ever see my partner again? And what's that mean for a newborn baby? So it's sort of, it just kind of completely, you just end up in this whole world of what you thought you weren't going to be in after having had a newborn, really. So, it's a very scary time. But I think one of the positive things is that people can make a recovery from this illness if they get the right kind of treatment and support.
I said in my introduction about healthcare professionals having limited confidence in discussing or identifying the illness. How good is our health system at picking up postpartum psychosis and treating it?
One of the things that we've been campaigning for over the last 10 years really is to make sure that health professionals that are in that perinatal period, so supporting and treating women and families, know about postpartum psychosis, know how to recognise it, and know how to get that help and support quickly, because there is specialist units, specialist perinatal mental health teams now that once people get there, then there is that specialist treatment for them. But there's still quite a bit of work to do in terms of making sure that people recognise what postpartum psychosis is and know what to do to get that specialist help.
How widespread is that specialist help available across the UK?
It's much better than it was. Most areas now have a specialist perinatal mental health team, and we also have specialist inpatient mother and baby units. Not everywhere in the UK, for example, we don't have one in Northern Ireland at the moment. We don't have one North Mid Wales, and there's patches up in the north and up in Scotland. So the idea is that every family really should have access to the care that they need.
I know a key aspect of the charity's campaigning work is for postpartum psychosis to be treated as a medical emergency.
That's one of the messages that we try and get out, really, because what we find is that women can go from having given birth, being very well, and then needing inpatient psychiatric care within a few hours. If postpartum psychosis is suspected, then really it should be same-day admission to a specialist unit.
Give me an idea of what the treatment landscape looks like.
That will often be with medication. Sometimes it can involve electroconvulsive therapy or ECT, but alongside lots of kind of psychological support, practical support, caring for the baby, and peer support as well. So lots of different people involved in that kind of care of the woman, really.
How quickly can a woman recover from postpartum psychosis?
It's very individual, so it's very dependent on the severity of the illness, how quickly that woman got access to care, what type of care that was. We tend to see kind of phases of recovery, so we might have that acute phase where they recover from what we call a bit of the crisis moment, where they're very poorly and then they get medication and treatment that they need. And then we sort of have this more kind of long-term recovery where the symptoms, like the psychosis and possibly depression at the same time, and all the anxiety might kind of reduce a little bit. But then there's more the kind of emotional and psychological recovery, coming to terms with what happened, trying to make sense of all these kind of experiences that they've had. Quite a lot of recovery is around the baby, so often feeling quite guilty of what happened in the beginning, maybe some of the shame of having a severe mental illness. So lots of kind of emotional and psychological things to work through after the acute symptoms. And it might look like they need to have psychological input, peer support, supportive family and friends. So there's quite a lot of people involved in recovery, including help for the partners and families to come to terms with everything that's happened, really.
Peer support alongside the campaigning work you do is where action on postpartum psychosis comes in, isn't it?
What we offer, I guess, is that kind of unique experience of someone having been through it already. It helps people massively to be able to talk about anything without judgment and feeling kind of less isolated, really, and offering hope that things are going to be okay, and even offering hope to partners and family members to say, this is what it's like now, but it's not always going to be this way, and things are going to get better for you and for your family.
One of the many women that have been helped so much by the charity is Cee Jae, a young mum from Somerset, as she explains the value of the support she's received from Action on Postpartum Psychosis is immeasurable.
It is invaluable. It's just amazing. They have regular online peer groups. They've got support for dads, grandparents. They've got them for parents that are LGBT as well. For me, myself, it's been great to know there's a place where other people get it. I've not met anyone in person that's been through my experience. And if I speak about it, they go, oh, I know somebody who's been through postpartum depression, which again is a devastating condition and can have very detrimental outcomes like postpartum psychosis, but it is very different. And I still think there's a lack of knowledge, and having this charity really just promotes what it is, how it affects people, and just bringing that community together.
My grateful thanks to Sally Wilson and to CJ. You can find out more about Action on Postpartum Psychosis by visiting their website, app-network.org. That's app-network.org. And you can stay in touch with everything we do on radio across the UK by visiting our wordonhealth.com website. That's wordonhealth.com.
Word on Health. On air and online 52 weeks of the year with Paul Pennington. Word on Health. Your personal prescription for your very best of health.